Welcome to the podcast. I'm Angela Bobier, and this is Life in the Talbot Settlement, brought to you by Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. In this series, we will do our best to give you a full appreciation of the history of Western Elgin County in southwestern Ontario, from First Nations to the early settlers to the 1950s. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Welcome to episode 44 in our podcast series, Life in the Talbot Settlement. Thank you to Katlyn Reintsma for putting together the script and the research for this episode. The Talbot Settlement quickly became home to many people after word spread of the new lands. The majority of settlers came from Ireland, Scotland, England, and in later years Germany, among other countries as well. Along with the settlers, various traditions and beliefs followed them from their previous homes. In today's episode, we discuss some of the past superstitions and ghost stories of the Talbot Settlement. Many people of Western Elgin County recall the story of the Cowell Ghost. This story was brought back to our attention by Duncan McTavish and his sister Marg, who participated in our seniors' oral history project. One day, while the children of Cowell were at school, a white, ghost-like figure was spotted by some farmers. The men ran to the school, telling the kids to go home and stay safe. Children rushed to their homes, scared and confused. Meanwhile, the men took to the woods with their hunting rifles, following bare human footprints in the ground. Soon the figure was spotted again, guns pointed directly at the strange phenomenon. This ghostly figure was no ghost at all. In fact, it was a neighbor who had gone hunting in the off-season and decided that a white sheet would be able to keep the deer from spotting him. Luckily, the man had not been shot by the Cowell ghost hunters. Mark says even though everyone in the community had been frightened by the events taking place that afternoon, she wasn't scared at all. As a matter of fact, after dinner, she went across the road to skate, all by herself. If life here in the Talbot Settlement was a little dry, the settlers didn't have to look far to get the latest strange happenings. The daily newspapers were filled with stories from murders to hypnotism, bringing the settlers with drama from all over the world. One article, on Wednesday, September 3rd, 1890, in the St. Thomas Daily Times, reads, "Hypnotic religion, extraordinary influence of a female evangelist, said to be insane. Her surprising influence on immense audiences." St. Louis, Missouri, September 1st. For 2 months, Mrs. Maria B. Woodworth, the evangelist, has been conducting a revival here in a tent capable of sheltering 9,000 people. For the past 2 weeks, these meetings have increased in interest and excitement until they have become sensational in the extreme. Mrs. Woodworth is assisted by several singing and praying lieutenants. During the past week, it has been a nightly occurrence to see from 50 to 250 men, women, and children stretched flat upon their backs on the ground or on the platform, writhing in religious frenzy or in a dead stupor from exhaustion, while 1,000 more excited individuals danced, shouted, cried, sang, and swung their arms in the air. Dr. Wellington Adams and Dr. Theodore Diller, authorities on insanity, declare that Mrs. Woodworth is simply an insane woman of great hypnotic power, that the trances into which she throws her auditors are simply hypnos. They declare that she is doing great harm to thousands and is creating evils from which there can be no cure. When the doctors questioned the woman, she gave a history of her life, telling in detail of the marvelous visions. She claims to have conversed with God, Christ, and the Trinity, and the devil many times. In fact, to be at the present time on familiar terms with all of them. She also said she has seen both heaven and hell and told what they looked like. She is the same woman who, while at Oakland, California, preached great earthquakes and tidal waves that could destroy the large cities. Now, this woman would later be known around the world as the trance evangelist and mother of Pentecost. Maria became one of the most influential Pentecostal evangelists of the early 1900s. Across the beachfronts of Lake Erie, residents of the shores have reported witnessing phantom ships on the horizon, appearing for a few minutes before slipping into the haze. Though more than just phantom ships have been reported on the waters. The following tale takes place in the Welland Canal, a canal we mentioned in a previous episode called Ports and Shipwrecks. This spooky legend tells of a ghost dog linked to the ship Mary Jane, who saw her last day on Lake Erie in 1881. The ship sailed long ago on Lake Erie with its mascot, a large black Newfoundland dog. In midst of the voyage, their four-legged friend fell overboard and was crushed by the gate of a canal lock. This would not be the last time the dog would be spotted. It is said that the dog haunted the crew as night fell with endless baying howls. Some believe the dog was angered by the crew's inability or unwillingness to rescue him. It is said that the dog appears on ships that face oncoming trouble. The black figure will appear on deck or climb aboard from the water and cross the ship before leaping off the other side. The ghost dog has been reported to be seen not only on Lake Erie, but on doomed ships on almost all the Great Lakes. Many residents of Fingal have heard the gruesome tales of the medical students who studied in the once bustling town. Some tales may seem so disturbing that you ought to think they were made up. One lady recalled seeing students soak human limbs in a little creek that cut across the fields on the eastern edge of the village. It is rumored the students retrieved the bodies from the lake. After storms, corpses would often wash up. Unidentifiable, the students would simply take them for their research. Body snatching from cemeteries was also very popular at this point in time. You probably hear mostly about that in Britain. This story and many more equally disturbing ones were told by numerous early community members, leaving those of us hearing them disgusted and in disbelief. Later, the villagers would bring an end to the medical school in Fingal, and it's no question why. The next story is recalled by George Bowes in Sim's History of Elgin County, Volume 1. Frome is a little settlement west of Talbotville, where a beautiful girl with charming manners once lived. Clearly, she listened to our episode 42 and knew all about etiquette and manners. This young woman was seen as very sensitive in nature, and any turn in life took a tremendous toll on her mentally. When her father died, she was plunged into a state of melancholy. Since that fateful day of her father's passing, she thought of nothing but ending her sorrows. One cold winter night, two men were heading home after spending the evening at the Payne's Saloon at Talbotville Royal. Suddenly, a white figure appeared outside of the cemetery and glided across the center of the road. The men, startled, fled the scene in terror, not knowing what they had just witnessed. I'm going to assume that if they had left the saloon, probably they'd had some alcoholic beverages as well. The next day, news spread in the village. The townspeople speculated that it was the troubled girl. The young lady, while sleepwalking, slipped out of her farmhouse, which she shared with her mother, in only a white nightgown and slippers. She had walked all the way from her residence in Frome to the Penwarden house. There she was discovered by a passerby and taken to the Amasa Wood Hospital. She stayed at the facility until she recovered from frostbite on feet and hands. After returning to her home in Frome, she lived quietly. That is, until the following spring. The weather was warming, and people in the area began cleaning up their yards. A bonfire was made to rid of the brush and the bushes. Suddenly, the girl darted out of her house and cast herself into the flames. The young woman now lay beside her father in the Frome cemetery. Next, we'll tell the story of the ghost of Stalter's Gully. This story, of course, starts with an unfortunate event. A young woman drowned herself in the nearby gully after her parents would not allow her to marry the man that she loved. Heartbroken, she left her home and disappeared. As the day progressed, her parents became worried and alarmed the neighbors and hired help to search for her in the countryside. By nightfall, her body was found in a stream that threaded its way through the gully. Her body was recovered by the community and placed on the ropes of her bed. The sorrowful parents and neighbors retired to the sitting room, awaiting the arrival of the morning. During the night, a creaking was heard from her bedroom. Upon investigation, they found everything in order. The initial thought was that the dampness of her body was affecting the ropes of the bed, causing a possible creaking sound, though the ropes were strangely dry. It was then that they noticed the window of her bedroom was open, when they distinctly remembered closing it before they retired to the sitting room. They closed the window again, turning to leave the room, when suddenly the window, together with the bedroom door, opened just as fast as they had been closed. Frightened, one of the men propped himself against the door, but was flung across the room by an invisible force. When morning came, One of the men went to the barn to start his daily chores and to prepare the wagon to summon help. Grabbing the pitchfork, he went to lift it off the ground and for some strange reason could not muster the strength. Alarming the other men, they came to help, but to no avail, every one of them could not lift that pitchfork. It was like a giant magnetic force was restricting them from lifting this object even an inch off the ground. Events like this did not cease until the undertaker removed the body from the property. Strange occurrences like this were never experienced again at the family's home. Not long after the girl's death, a figure started appearing in the area of Stalter's Gully. These appearances of a lonely walking man appeared periodically for over 30 years. On one occurrence, the figure stood in the middle of the road near the halfway house and frightened a driver and his horse. It is said the horse became unmanageable. This peculiar sight of a wandering soul was only seen by some in the community, resulting in some being accused of overindulgence of alcoholic beverages. After a certain gentleman was laid to rest at the Hankinson Cemetery, the figure was never reported seen again. Some wonder if this man was the girl's lover who wandered the area in search of his other half. Stalter's Gully is in Malahide Township, in the eastern portion of Elgin County. One old legend tells of a little girl who lay dying of consumption. One evening, 2 young boys were heading home through the forest. Suddenly, ahead of them, they saw a girl cross their path. Noticing her as their friend, they called out her name, but she swiftly disappeared among the trees. Upon reaching home, the boys rushed to their kitchen, happily exclaiming, "Nellie's better! We saw her in the woods!" To their surprise, Nellie had passed away an hour before. This next tale is remembered by John Kenneth Galbraith, a professor of economics at Harvard who grew up in Dunwich Township. According to a local legend, treasure is buried on the site of Searles Hill, east of Black's Hill. It is believed the American soldiers on their way to Port Talbot during the War of 1812 buried their plunder in this spot. One day long ago, some men in Dutton got intoxicated. There's a theme throughout this episode. Got intoxicated and around midnight equipped themselves with shovels and headed to the hill. With all their effort, the effects of the alcohol wore off. No treasure was found that day, and a legend remains. When researching, Katlyn came across a book called Canadian Folklore from Ontario. It documents accounts from various people in the province, one of which was from Elgin County, Miss Jean W. Barr. There were many long-held customs formerly observed in Elgin County. Having strongly held legends and superstitions were very common in the 1800s. Families often opened the door into the room in which a corpse was lying to let their spirit depart into the unknown. Telling the bees was another popular belief. Crepe was sometimes tied to the beehives and left there until after the funeral. To dream of red ground or muddy water is to bring bad luck. If the pallbearers for any reason turn again into the house with the coffin, another death will soon follow the last. These were all believed by the settlers to be signs of foretelling of death. Among farmers, many superstitions were believed to be good or bad luck. The first colt or lamb in the springtime coming towards you means good luck. If it is reversed, bad luck will soon ensue. On the first day of plowing, if you see a farmer making his furrow towards you, luck is in your favor. Please take everything in the episode with a grain of salt. These are old stories, folklore, items handed down from person to person. And in no way are we endorsing that any of this is true. Please share the podcast with your friends and follow us on all social media platforms at Backus-Page House. The Backus-Page House Museum and Tyrconnell Heritage Society acknowledges the land we are on today as the traditional territory of First Nations people. As settlers at a settler-focused museum, we value both the significant historical and contemporary contributions of all original peoples and ask how we can be supportive in Indigenous cultural renewal. Life in the Talbot Settlement is a production of Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Your host has been Angela Bobier. Music provided by Jack Witmer. And thanks to our producer, Katlyn Reintsma. To make a charitable donation, become a Tyrconnell Heritage Society member, and to contact the Backus-Page House Museum, please visit our website, www.backuspagehouse.ca. Thank you again for listening.